This is the Civility Project, and I'd like to introduce you to Lynn, who's going to take it from here and move us along through how to behave in public. Lynn?
Well, I don't know about that, but thank you very much, Chris. I appreciate it. I would love to introduce the Civility Project, and in a moment, you guys will meet Nolan, Finley, and Stephen Henderson, who are the wonderful personalities behind this effort, and learn all about it. I'd first like to start by sharing a little sponsor video. We're very grateful to Delta Dental for funding this and making this free to everybody who hosts it as well as attends. And we're really happy to announce a second sponsor, TCF, that just came on yesterday. So let's quickly hear from Delta Dental, and then we'll jump into the session.
We are living in challenging times. Politics is polarizing. Racism is rampant. The pandemic is frightening, and families are divided. Tough times require more dialogue and more understanding. But navigating our differences constructively is hard work. Delta Dental believes that healthy, smart, vibrant communities are also civil and harmonious. They are places where disagreement does not have to be toxic or destructive. Civility starts with listening. Welcome to the Civility Project.
So welcome, everybody. We're really thrilled to have you. And now I'd like to introduce Nolan, Finley, and Stephen Henderson, who are the founders of the Civility Project. And I'd like to start by having them introduce what the Civility Project is and where it came from. So Stephen and Nolan, you are up. Oh, one other thing I just want to mention really quickly. Any questions you have during the session, please put in the chat and we will flow them into the session. So we want to hear from you. Just make sure that your questions are there and I'll be monitoring the whole time. So Stephen and Nolan, you're up.
Thanks, Lynn. I want to start by saying it's good to be back at Schoolcraft College. It's the place that gave me an opportunity I never expected to have to get a college education, to begin my college education, and always grateful and appreciative of Schoolcraft College. It's a wonderful asset in our community. And so Steve and I have been doing this now throughout the pandemic year, this Civility Project. We had versions of it, informal versions of it, going on for the last few years, where we have tried to bring people from different perspectives, people from different political places together in social settings to sort of show folks that it's possible to develop friendships and relationships and to talk productively across our political divides. And it became much more urgent this year. We started with live sessions in January, and then the pandemic quickly moved us to these Zoom sessions. But then everything else unfolded over the past year that I don't need to remind you of all of them. We've lived through it, and the urgency for civil engagement, I think, grew greater as the year progressed, and the obstacles to civil engagement grew too as we were more isolated from one another. It increased our distance and our distrust. And so the goal of the Civility Project is quite simple. We want to tone down the hate, and that's the only word I can use for what I've been seeing over the past few years anyway in this country, where we've come to hate each other solely on the basis of our political differences. And we are never going to get anywhere in terms of productive dialogue and problem solving and a sense of community again in our nation if we don't learn to talk to each other without screaming at each other and without hating one another and without respecting one another. And so those are the So those are sort of the foundational values of the Civility Project. And, we have really enjoyed this past year of meeting with so many people and talking to so many people and hearing about their own struggles with relationships because of the divisive era we are in. So I'll let Steve pick it up from there. But again, we are glad to be with you, and thanks to Delta Dental and thanks to TCF Bank. We sure appreciate it.
Yeah, so I think one of the easy ways to kind of understand what our goal is with the Civility Project is to describe it as an effort by me and Nolan to take the things that we have learned over the last 13 or 14 years of working together, becoming colleagues and then friends, and share that with other people. It is an unusual friendship. It is more unusual, in fact, now than it was when we started working together. I mean, the country was divided 13 or 14 years ago for sure, but in the last 4 or 5 years, I mean, division doesn't even begin to describe the way that we deal with each other. And Nolan and I, we sit on very disparate, opposite ends of the political spectrum, and in fact, that was what first brought us into the same space, into the same workspace. Was that he was the editorial page editor of the conservative Detroit News, and I was the editorial page editor of the very liberal Detroit Free Press. And people thought, wow, this would be interesting to get the two of them together and see if they can fight, see if they can argue. And we did, and we were good at it. I would say we're still pretty good at it. And it was clear from the jump, we just didn't see things the same way. Almost anything, any issue that you would kind of throw between the two of us, we could find disagreement. But we also found that each of us was more than what those political points of view represented, and that we could find commonalities between each other beyond those political arguments. And so even as we would get after each other pretty aggressively, on television or on radio or on panels, and not shy away, in fact, from really difficult subjects that inspired those kinds of disagreements. We found a way to maintain a respect and a civility that I think has grown the friendship between the two of us. Devin Skillian, who's an anchor at WDIV here in Detroit, and as a friend of both of ours, and who was one of the people who used to try to pit us against each other on his show, Flashpoint, has often described our relationship as being like the sheepdog and the coyote from the Bugs Bunny cartoons, right? Like they go to work and try to kill each other all day, trying to prevent the other from doing his job. And then at the end of the day, they'd go to the same, time clock and punch out and say, let's go get a drink or see you tomorrow. And it has at times felt exactly like that. But the idea of the Civility Project is really to say to everyone else, this is possible. Yeah. In the spaces where you live, in the spaces where you operate with other people, in your world, at school or at home or at work or in your church or your neighborhood, it is possible to maintain a decent relationship, a working relationship, a friendship with people you disagree with. And you can do it without having to set those disagreements aside. You don't have to ignore the fact that you disagree. You don't have to shy away from difficult discussions or arguments. In fact, you can lean into them if you are able to see it from this perspective that those disagreements have their place, but they aren't defining either of you or the entire relationship.
And this relationship Steve described it wasn't accidental. We decided, I think almost from the beginning, that this friendship would be worthwhile. Getting to know each other would be worthwhile, and having a cordial relationship, that we would find value in that. And we decided that early on. And so we took a pause from our arguing to actually try to get to know one another and understand what the things that motivate our opinions. And so, we talked about our personal experiences, our values, and how those things played into why one of us is a conservative, one of us is a liberal, why we take the positions we take on issues. And we think that's the first step, because too often today we look at somebody who disagrees with us, who's on the other side of a political issue, and assign very evil, sinister qualities to that person. We think they're stupid. We think they've got ulterior motives. It doesn't occur to us that they're just like us, and they take the same information, the same data, same facts and figures, and apply their own experiences and values to those, and come up with an opinion. And if it's different than yours, if it's different than mine, doesn't make them stupid or sinister, and it doesn't mean they're out to cause you harm. Not usually. Sometimes, of course, that is the case. But learning those things about another person before you start this process of trying to engage across the divide or have a relationship with an unlikely friend, it's an essential first step. And so when we used to do these exercises in person, and sometimes still when we're working with a group, we ask people to do that first step. Find someone who is different from you and whom you have passionate disagreements with, and have a non-threatening introductory conversation first, where you truly explore the experiences of the other person, the background of the other person, to gain an understanding of why they are who they are. And it's a valuable first step to build the respect that it takes and the trust that it takes to have the harder conversations.
So we have a question already. Thank you to Catrice. I appreciate it. And everybody who's on, please put your questions in the chat so we can get them in the queue. So Catrice asks, what are some ways that you believe will help to end the bias and stigma that keep us divided?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of, what we say in this project, and what we talk about in this project is, that first step up that I just went through about talking to each other and developing respect and trust for each other, and realizing that the other person isn't out to harm you, or the other things we recommend is to set an honest goal for your conversations. What do you want to get out of a conversation with the person who is taking an opposing position in life than you are? What do you want to get out of that conversation? And if you set an honest goal, if you say, well, I'm here to learn, to try to understand, to try to maybe gain some knowledge I didn't have, and to walk away with a better feeling for the person than I had coming in. That's an honest goal for the conversation. If you're out to convert or change, I'm going to win this argument, I'm going to destroy that other person's point, that's really not an honest or productive goal. And I think too often that's how we go into this thing. We want to walk away feeling that we've won, or feeling that we've converted someone to our point of view. That's not going to happen. I mean, Steve's been working on me for a decade and a half and hasn't brought me into the light. And so it's just not going to happen. And that's just going to lead to frustration. So what's your goal here? You got a family member, a friend you want to be able to engage with. Set good, productive goals for the conversation. And then examine your own self. If you're approaching this encounter with a feeling of self-righteousness, I'm right, and I've got all the facts on my side, and I've got this, that, or the other. If you're approaching it with that sort of smugness, that I'm here to enlighten, it's not going to go anywhere. So check your own smugness before you enter an engagement like this. Things will go smoother.
Yeah, I think it's also about, especially right now, about consciously turning away from some of the very dominant cultural dynamics of things like social media, or the 24-hour news cycle, all of which encourage you to make assumptions about people who disagree with you. They encourage you to dig in and to say, I'm not going to interact with people who quote unquote don't get it, or people I don't agree with. They cheer on the idea of that kind of reaction to difference. And I think because we exist, 24 hours a day in spaces that are encouraging that, it becomes harder and harder to behave differently, to give somebody the benefit of the doubt when they express an opinion that doesn't reflect your point of view, and not assume that that person means you harm or is not as intelligent or well-read as you are. I think there are important lines to respect, and there are times when people do mean harm. I mean, there is evil in the world. We see that playing out pretty dramatically right now as well. But I think, we're encouraged to put everybody into that category who doesn't agree with us, and that's really dangerous, and it precludes you from reaching any sort of understanding of what the other side is about. I mean, one of the things that I think both Nolan and I would say about the interaction between the two of us is that we both learned a lot about those opposite politics, that because we're able to have an argument, a spirited argument, a passionate argument, but not walk away, not shut the other person out. We come to really understand a lot more about where that person's coming from and why they believe the things that they do, and to understand the basis for those arguments. But to do that, you do have to push back really hard, I think, against the sort of prevailing cultural norms right now, which all encourage you just to slam the door in the face of somebody who disagrees.
And there are people in both of our circles who very much resent this friendship, and how could you be engaged with him? I'm going to be talking with him. He's so awful, or he wrote this, or he said that, and I don't spend a whole lot of time defending Steve's positions, but I certainly spend a whole lot of time talking about the passion and intelligence and reason he brings to his positions. And I think that's what's important. And so often we make assumptions about people. Steve talked about assumptions a minute ago. We make assumptions about people based on their political views. We get it every day. I mean, I get the most vile, hateful emails from people who say, very personal, I just absolutely loathe you, I hate you. And we fall into that trap. We see or hear somebody expressing views. Oh, I hate that person. No, you hate their views, maybe. You disagree with their views. But until you know a person, you can't decide whether you hate them or not. And, I learned this early on. Steve and I were up on Mackinac Island for the Republican state leadership meeting one year. And, of course, that was sort of a rough place for Steve to be. But we were in a bar up there after the sessions, and Steve and I are having a drink, and I walked away, and these two women pounced on me and said, "How could you be friends with him? He's just so awful." And I said, "Well, do you know him? Have you met him?" "No, we've never met him. We've never talked to him." I said, "Well, there's a space there next to him. Why don't you do me a favor and walk over there and talk to him for a little while?" And of course, they charged over there, loaded for bear, and Steve engaged them and talked with him. And it was a long time later, I finally had to pull him away. And, they saw me later and they said, "Oh, he's just so wonderful." Now, nothing about Steve's viewpoints had changed, but they'd taken the time to actually get to know him before they decided they hated him. And I think that's one thing we have to be mindful of. People are more complex than just their political views. There's a lot more to them. And if you decide you want to find out that about the rest of the person and who they are, I think you come away with a whole different viewpoint of them. Because most people are likable.
We have really great comments and questions in the chat, and there's sort of a theme emerging. So Lou asked, how do you have these kinds of conversations when people don't agree on and or accept the facts? And then Sandra said, it seems that media sources are divided and some people don't seek valid sources. And then Catrice mentioned that a lot of negative experiences can be based on inaccurate information or ignorance. And so who's responsible for restoring peace through teaching accurate history? So as longtime celebrated journalists, perhaps the two of you can talk a little bit about this really important issue of facts and research and accuracy and yeah. Who's in charge of that?
And of course, everybody thinks the facts support their opinion. And most folks stop looking at the facts once they've confirmed their opinion. Facts are interesting things, and they do tend to oftentimes to shift and change. And I think that goes back to, what I said earlier. Don't approach with that self-righteousness of, I got the facts over here and I'm going to beat you over the head with them. People do see things differently, even when the facts are laid out. They take a different view of things. As far as media sources, I don't think you can rely on just one media source today. You've got to be a very informed media and news shopper. I think you've got to go to a lot of different places and listen to a lot of different viewpoints before you can get a whole picture today. There aren't so many of those mass market sites that try to, just stay in the middle and give you their version of objective information, particularly in the electronic media, particularly on the cable news stations. They tend to deliver information, or people tend to seek information from them that affirm their views. And you can't just stop with the outlet that says the things you want to hear. You got to challenge yourself, and you've got to be open to going to other places and hearing the other views, and then be honest in your weighing of that information. It's a very difficult process to be fully informed and comfortably informed today.
Yeah. I think the assault on truth that is part of the political dialogue now, that has been weaponized by many people in the political dialogue, is a real threat to not just governance and stability, but to civility, right? And let's just use one of the most recent examples: the idea that somehow Donald Trump really won the election in November, and that there was some massive fraud in cities like Detroit that brought the victory to Joe Biden. There are people who believe that, and we all know that there are facts that prove that's not true. It isn't true. And I don't think there's anything wrong in the context of a civil discussion with asserting those facts and saying, look, that just is not the case. But I think you also have to ask yourself how effective that is in actually building a dialogue with somebody who believes that. Now, I'm not talking about trying to have a dialogue with the people who like went to Washington and attacked the Capitol and, you know, insurrectionists and people like that. I mean, that's an extreme that I think falls outside the realm of what we're talking about. But there are lots of people who were not part of that, who still believe that there was something wrong with the election, and that the results didn't reflect the way people actually voted. So, you know, I think you have to ask yourself, what's the effective way of actually having a dialogue with those people that brings you to a better understanding of where they're coming from and brings them to a better understanding of where you're coming from. Arguing about the facts is, you know, asserting the facts is important, but arguing about the facts is actually proven to be counterproductive in those contexts. What I find more effective, and this is very hard to do, is that inquiry that we're talking about. Why do you believe that? What is it that's leading you to that conclusion? Because frankly, it isn't facts that are leading them there. We know that. There aren't facts to support what they're saying. But an actual dialogue with them, I think, gets at the fears that they feel about what's happening in the country, why they feel that fear, where they feel that fear comes from, and leads you to at least a space where there's some understanding. And the value of that understanding, I think, is the thing that we're talking about. I would love to be able to say all of the people who don't believe that the election was won by Joe Biden ought to be rounded up and put someplace, and they won't get to vote anymore, right? Well, we're only going to have people who believe in truth participate in the process, but that's absurd. That's not the bargain we've made in this republic. That is not the way a democracy works. They are entitled to the opinions they have, even if they don't have a basis in fact. And the way that we have to be able to govern together is finding some way of understanding across that divide. And again, asserting the facts is important, but dwelling on factual argument in this context often sets you back. I mean, people start to tune it out. And there is something motivating what they're saying and what they're believing that's important and worthy of discussion. And I think focusing on that is really important.
And I don't think, just simply dismissing their beliefs and their dismissing their beliefs out of hand is productive at all. I mean, this election unfolded in very unusual times. The whole process of voting changed. The rules were being changed in a hurry without fully explaining to people what was going on. So I think it'd be useful to hear what their, beyond, oh, somebody told me this or something, what made them so open to mistrusting a system that for the most part they'd always trusted before. And I think you approach a conversation with that idea that you want to hear what are the things that triggered that in your mind. You might find it's not what you might have expected, and it might help us understand how to avoid a similar situation in the future.
So we have a question from someone who said in today's Free Press, there was a Q&A about steering away from discussion on politics and religion in social gatherings. And so the question is, under what circumstances do you think these conversations should be a part of social settings?
Well, it depends how comfortable you are with the person. I mean, I don't think there's anywhere Steve and I can't have a conversation about something tough and, risk embarrassing the people around us. But, we're comfortable with each other and doing that. And sometimes people enjoy watching that. But, I used to my old boss, we used to go to football games together and what have you. And his wife, as soon as she got to the game, she'd plop right down next to me and say, "So, what about Trump this and what about Trump that?" I'm like, "I'm watching football. I'm not here to talk about politics. Pick your spot, and pick a comfortable spot, particularly if you're new to to this relationship, you're new to this effort. Pick a comfortable spot. I would advise against engaging at work in these kind of subjects more so than in social settings, because there's dangers in that. So make sure you're in an appropriate setting, and make sure that both you and the other person have the trust necessary to have an honest conversation. Because if you always are thinking about, oh, I better not say that, or oh, I wonder how that's going to go over, you're not going to have much of a productive conversation. It's got to be sort of a safe zone where nobody's going to run out and say, he said that, in an honest, well-intentioned conversation. So it does go back to, again, what we said at the beginning, the trust, and make sure you're in a situation where it's appropriate to have these conversations.
Yeah, I mean, the other real question is, not social situations, but work. I mean, I think increasingly people are finding themselves in these kinds of disputes with coworkers and in the workplace, and there again, time, place, and manner really matters. Work is often a more difficult space to have these kinds of conversations in, because there are power dynamics at play that matter, and and people trying to get their work done and maybe not talk about politics. You do have to have your antenna up about when that works and when it doesn't. At the same time, I think work is a space where civil disagreement has real value, and I think employers in particular have an opportunity to try to encourage that kind of civil disagreement among their employees. In a lot of instances, maybe through exercises like the ones that we're talking about, but you do it in the right way and in the right time and place, so that employees don't feel bullied or beat up because of what they think, and so you got to pick and choose. There's a right place and a wrong place and a wrong time to do these things.
But I will say, Steve, that process is perhaps more important than place. I don't think you ever get in trouble if you're engaged in honest listening. If you're truly listening to the other person, I think you can pull this off anywhere and any place. But most of us don't listen. We talk and we don't listen, and then things escalate, and we don't hear what the other person is trying to communicate. But that idea of effective listening and honest listening, I think, is extremely important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's funny because I was recently swimming at the Y, and a man in the lane next to me started talking politics, and I was like, probably not the place.
It's like, I'm swimming,
right? I just want to swim, and so when we talk about that, and you guys have often said this isn't just like going up to strangers or on Facebook having these conversations, but maybe with a cousin or an uncle or someone that you're on different sides of perspective, but you want to work on that relationship. I think wanting to work on the relationship is one of the keys, right? And then also the listening. So I wonder if you guys could talk a little bit about how you choose the people you have these conversations with, and then what do you mean when you say listening?
Well, that's Steve talks about that listening part of it very well. So I think we'll let him handle that.
Yeah, I mean, listening is one of our kind of core principles of the kind of civility that we're talking about. And Nolan touched on this earlier. I think we mean that word a little differently than most of us employ it in most of our interactions. Oftentimes, we believe that if we're not talking, that means we're listening. If I'm allowing you to talk, that means I must be listening. But maybe I'm really not. Maybe I'm still in my head thinking about, what I'm going to say as soon as you stop talking. Maybe I'm thinking about, what I think of what you say and judging what you say rather than really trying to invest in what you're saying and why you might believe that. Maybe I'm not really listening at all. And so, the listening we're talking about, I think, is described as active listening, where you really are focused on giving the other person a chance to say what they're saying, but also really investing in what they're saying. And I have two pretty simple tests for myself, with regard to active listening. And look, I'm as guilty as lots of other people about it, right? Sometimes when Nolan's talking, I'm thinking about what I'm going to say when he shuts up.
I try not to.
But the tests I have for whether I'm actually listening are: one, could I repeat what he has said back to him, and not in a mocking or dismissive way, but in a faithful way? Could I really represent the side of the argument that he's taking in an honest and faithful way? And then the other test I have is whether I have questions about what he said. I think anytime you're actually listening, anytime you're actually really investing in what someone's point of view is and what they're saying, you do have questions. You want to know more. You want to know why you said this. Why do you believe that part of what you said? Where did you get that? Where does that come from? When you are listening actively, I think both of those things are true, and it's the mark of an actual civil exchange.
And remember, a conversation is not a competition. You're not competing for time. You're not saying, "Oh man, I scored a point there." You're never going to make the other person feel comfortable and willing to reveal themselves if you approach it from that point of view. I mean, you just got to, if you listen, you're liable to hear something that strikes you as extremely useful, extremely interesting. But if you're just simply waiting for your turn to have at 'em again, it's never going to happen. You're not going to walk away with anything. You already know what you think. I mean, you should want to know what the other person thinks.
That's a good point. So Alec asked, can you point to examples of where you see good modeling of the civility that you're describing in action in today's political arena? And follows up that question with, do our institutions or processes inhibit this from happening?
It's a good question. I guess we tend to try to look toward the political world for this sort of examples. And when I was coming up and covering politics, and I'm sure the same thing, Steve would say the same thing, it was not unusual to see and watch people bang away at each other in the political arena, in the policymaking arena, and then go have dinner together, and take, have their families spend weekends and time together. It was not uncommon. And I think it's less common for a lot of reasons today. I think the hyperpartisanship of our systems make it tougher today. The idea that only within the two parties, only one viewpoint, one line of thinking is permitted. When I was coming up, we had liberal Republicans and conservative Democrats, and you had people of different viewpoints within these parties. Now they're much more single-minded. Term limits, I think, have been a terrible affront to civility. But we look in our world today, I think Fred Upton and Debbie Dingle have been trying to be good modelers of this. This whole problem solvers caucus we see in Congress now is a positive development. There's some reason to hope, but the political parties themselves do not reward civility, and they don't reward cooperation. They punish both of those things because they want to keep their members in line. And so working across the aisle has become very difficult and very dangerous for today's political world.
Yeah, and to the extent that we have allowed those parties to control the process and define the institutions that make the process work. We have allowed their uncivil approach, to rule the day. The partisan process of choosing who will represent whom, for instance, the redistricting process that we go through every 10 years, which has always been left to the political party that has control at that time, is an example of allowing them to overlay their really uncivil template on everything else. And we're about to see in Michigan this year how doing it differently might produce a different result. If you take the parties largely out of the process, do you come up with a system of representation that doesn't reward hyperpartisanship and incivility? The extent to which we've allowed money to not just support political campaigns, but to dominate the entire process, I think is another, and to do it without any sort of transparency. So that you don't have any idea who's paying for what. Also encourages this kind of, extreme sniping and argument that pushes us towards the margins in these conversations and de-emphasizes the middle. We do have the power to change those things, but you have to wrest that power away from the parties who are deeply, deeply, deeply invested in keeping it the way it is.
Yeah, and I've been thinking a lot about that over the past several months, and I think it is time to sort of experiment with different processes, different models. I would love to see this political duopoly we have shaken a little or shaken up a little, or at least its hold on our politics shaken up a little. I think it's, this national popular vote movement is something we really ought to be thinking about, given what happened in this last election. Because if we had had a national popular vote deciding the outcome of the 2020 election, there'd have been no question of a winner. 7 million, almost 8 million votes separated the two candidates. On the other hand, you lose a whole lot of that local control of the election process. I don't know if fraud's easier in one place or easier in another system, but I think it's worth exploring and seeing if that would be something that would end this constant turmoil over election results. I also like the idea of having a ballot without designations. So you're a Republican, you can run, the party can support you. You're a Democrat, the party can back you, fund your campaign. But when voters walk into the voter booth, all they see then is your name and no party designation. I think that would break this hold and give other voices a chance to rise, and other parties a chance to crack into this system. ranked party voting may account, or ranked candidate voting may, ranked choice voting, I guess is what it's called, may also work. I think we can afford to experiment given what we've been through and the damage that would occur if we went through it again. So I mean, we've got this time now between elections to start talking about what's worth trying and whether there's better ways to do it that would lead to better acceptance of the results and a more civil process.
Yeah, we have a bunch of questions as we narrow in on our last 15 minutes. So Lou wants to know if there's an issue that the two of you started out disagreeing on and ended up coming to something acceptable between the two of you. Like, did you move in like closer to each other? And if so, how did you get there?
I'm sure there are.
Not many.
There must be. But it's not so much that we've come, there's things we agree on at the start. We're not divided on everything. And on most issues, we agree on the outcome we'd like to see. I mean, particularly on these local issues. I mean, we're both very, very passionate about the revival and of the city of Detroit and the health of the city of Detroit and the prosperity. We've got different thoughts, perhaps, on how that should unfold. I think we are both have a very real commitment to fairness. We want to see a fairer society and a more just society. We have different ideas for what that might look like in the end or how you get there. But I think we both would like to see people be able to reach the maximum of their potential in a fair society. We want to see, we want this to be a prosperous community and a prosperous state. We have different thoughts for how to get there, and that's where sort of the tension in our conversation results from. But it's also where the productive aspects of our conversation arises from.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that I think a good example of how the two of us have an influence over the other in terms of how we think through these things is probably the redistricting issue, right? It is something for Nolan to admit that, that the old partisan way of letting the parties draw the lines for Congress and the State House didn't work. He wasn't in that space when this was on the ballot a few years ago. But at the same time, he really disagrees with me still about the process that we're using now. I mean, I think he has very little faith that that the solution we've come up with will produce, something markedly different or markedly less partisan. And so we would probably still go 15 rounds over that. But we both agree that, hey, there's probably a better way than what we were doing to do that and to produce the outcome that we want, which is that both that candidates aren't drawn to the extremes of both parties in order to run and win, right? I mean, if you're a moderate Democrat or if you're a moderate Republican, what district do you have a better chance than a hyper-partisan? I mean, and that has everything to do with the way the districts are drawn. We would agree now, I think, that that's true, but we still disagree about how to do it. And I think that's the kind of thing that you see over time as we keep, we've had this argument, 50 times in the last 3 years. People change their minds and move, but it's never. I really can't think of many examples, or if any, of where one of us has just said, "No, you're right." No, you're right. I'm on your side of this now. I don't think that happened.
We have worked together on a lot of initiatives and a lot of
yeah, right. Things we start out on the same side on. Yeah,
Yeah.
there are really good examples of that.
Yeah. So Nicole wants to know how educators can help students to see the value of respectful discourse. And she mentions that some students don't have the skills to navigate uncomfortable conversations, but those are valuable skills. And so, how do we help them with that? And is that a factor of youth, that in time you learn that, or do we need to model it? What do you guys think?
Yeah, both of those things. I don't think it's ever too early to start teaching good conversational skills. That whole listening aspect is an excellent start. The teaching people to ask respectful questions in a respectful, non-threatening way, because I think one of the best ways to diffuse a conversation that's going south is to ask questions of the other person. Stop and ask questions. Let things cool down a little and let the other person talk a little about themselves or what have you. I think it's never too young to start those exercises.
I mean, frankly, I think there should be robust parts of the curriculum, in our public schools especially, that focus on teaching these skills, not just material that people need to know, but process. How do you exist in a world that is always going to include people who don't agree with you? I mean, this is what pluralism actually looks like, right? We've been fighting for that kind of pluralism for a really long time in this country, and I think for some people that pluralism means, well, the side that was locked out for a long time now gets to do to the other side what was done to them and shut the other side out. That's not pluralism. Pluralism says, look, there's going to be a lot of different approaches to this, a lot of different points of view, and we've got to find a way, for all of them to coexist. And that coexistence means respect. It means not nonviolence. It means not suppressing other people's rights. But it also means accepting that, look, just because somebody thinks of it differently than you do does not mean that they're wrong and have to be left out of the decision making.
And I would think it would be a good exercise to have for students, in that young age, to sit them down one-on-one across from each other and have them ask each other 5 questions without taking notes, and then have them repeat back the core of the answers they received to sort of force them to focus on listening rather than answering.
I love that. Sounds like one of our next sessions.
Maybe.
So our last question that we have time for today, which is a great place to end, it came from Larry, and he said how you both have spoken about the extreme polarity within the political parties, but then on the other hand, he's read articles claiming that the American public has a huge majority percentage of moderates in the middle. So if that's true, how do we revert to truly representative government that reflects the American public's thinking?
I don't believe there's a majority of anything in our country. If you look at Michigan as an example, I think Michigan is truly a representative state. It's why I think Michigan should vote first in the primaries. It truly is a place that looks more like the rest, the country as a whole, than most other states do, or many other states do. And if you look here, when we do polling, and when our pollster breaks it down, the sample group down, 30%, 32% Democrat, 32% Republican, and then the same amount of independents. And amongst that independent group, there are people who lean strongly one way or strongly the other, but they do tend to shift. And so I think one of the problems we have, and it's not is that we are so evenly divided. And maybe that's not really, maybe that's a benefit and not a problem, because I don't think majoritarianism is a good way to govern. But, we got to recognize that not everybody is in one party or another. A full third of us are in no party, and those folks get left out of the conversation a lot. And increasingly, I find myself in that group, and you get left out of the consideration because neither party can count on your support.
Well, I really want to thank Schoolcraft College Foundation and all of you for joining us today. I think this has been a really lovely conversation. It's been a great chat. So I definitely want to save it because so many people have said really insightful things. So Stephen and Nolan, thank you again for bringing us the Civility Project, and thank you to Schoolcraft for hosting this event.
It's been good.
Well, we were honored to have you all here today. Thank you, Civility Project, for joining Nolan and becoming honored ocelots, at least for the day. And we want everyone to know that we're going to continue on with this discussion of learning how to be more respectful and inclusive. In May, we will be hosting another program delving into DEI. Schoolcraft College believes that DEI is more than just letters in the alphabet. So we hope you'll all be able to join us for that particular program. And sandwiched in between, we have a very important project coming up. And as you can see right here, in April on the 29th, Reed is going to be discussing how to take control of your financial future at any age. Because as we all know, there's a lot of important events that come up in our lives. One of them is retirement, and it's never too early, it's never too late. So Reed will be sharing with us some very important information, how to make sure that we not just enjoy life today, but we enjoy the retirement we deserve. So on behalf of Schoolcraft College and all of my colleagues here, thank you so much, Civility Project. Thank you, everybody, for your wonderful comments and questions in the chat. And hopefully we'll see you all again in April. Have a good day. Stay safe.